everybody, welcome back. It's your girl Anastasia Angel back at it with another hot girl read. And yeah, I'm starting a little bit later today because I've really been putting in that work at my job. But let's just get into it. It's a little late, and literally when I finish this, I'm leaving. Oh, this is a long one, guys. This is a long one, not gonna lie. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, open up your pages. We are at Law 44. We're almost done with this book, Law 44 of the 48 Laws of Power by Mr. Robert Greene. Okay, guys. So, this is going to be a little bit of a longer chapter. I literally have less than an hour because I'm leaving at 7 because I'm not staying past 7. It's closed at 10. So let's get into it. Law 44. Disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect. Judgment. The mirror reflects reality, but it is also the perfect tool for deception. When you mirror your enemies doing exactly as they do, they cannot figure out your strategy. The mirror effect mocks and humiliates them, making them overreact. By holding up a mirror to their psyches, you seduce them with the illusion that you share their values. By holding up a mirror to their actions, you teach them a lesson. Few can resist the power of the mirror effect. Hi, Gemma. Welcome back. Oops. Oops, I just lost my page in the book. Okay. So, mirror effects, preliminary typology. Mirrors have the power to disturb us. Gazing at our reflection in the mirror, we most often see what we want to see, the image of ourselves with which we are most comfortable. We tend not to look too closely, ignoring the wrinkles and blemishes. But if we do look hard at the reflected image, we sometimes feel that we are seeing ourselves as others see us, as a person among other people, an object rather than a subject. That feeling makes us shudder. We see ourselves, but from the outside, minus the thoughts, spirit, and the soul that fill our consciousness, we are a thing. In using mirror effects, we symbolically recreate this disturbing power by mirroring the actions of other people, mimicking their movements to unsettle and infuriate them. Made to feel mocked, cloned, object like an image without a soul, they get angry. Or they do the same thing slightly differently and they may feel disarmed. You have perfectly reflected their wishes and desires. This is the narcissistic power of mirrors. It can either cause in either case, the mirror effect unsettles your targets, whether angering or entrancing them. And in that instance, you have the power to manipulate or seduce them. The effect contains great power because it operates on the most primitive emotions. There are four main mirror effects in the realm of power. Number one, the neutralizing effect. In ancient Greek mythology, the Gorgon Medusa had serpents for hair, protruding tongue, massive teeth, and a face so ugly that anyone who gazed at her turned into stone out of fright. But the hero Perseus managed to slay Medusa by polishing his bronze shield into a mirror, then using the reflection in the mirror to guide him as he crept up and cut off her head without looking at her directly. If the shield in this instance was a mirror, the mirror was also kind of a shield. Medusa could not see Perseus, she saw only her own reflected actions, and behind this scene, the hero stole up and destroyed her. So confused. So confused. Anybody else? This is the essence of the neutralizing effect. Do what your enemies do, following their actions as best as you can, and they cannot see what you are up to. They are blinded by your mirror. Their strategy for dealing with you depends on your reacting to them in a way characteristic of you. Neutralize it by playing a game of mimicry with them. The tactic has a mocking and even infuriating effect. Most of us remember the childhood experiences of someone teasing us by repeating our words exactly. After a while, usually not long, we wanted to punch them in the face. Working more subtly as an adult, you can still unsettle your opponents this way. Shielding your own strategy with the mirror, you lay invisible traps, or push your opponents into the trap they planned for you. This powerful technique has been used in military strategy since the days of Sun Tzu. In our own time, it often appears in political campaigning. It is also useful for useful for disguising those situations in which you have no particularly strategy yourself. This is the warrior's mirror. A reverse version of the neutralizing effect is the shadow. You shadow your opponent's every move without their seeing you. Use the shadow to gather information that will neutralize their strategy later on. When you will be able to thwart at their every move, the shadow is effective because to follow the movements of others is to gain valuable insights into their habits and routines. The shadow is the preeminent device for detective and spies. Okay, guys, let's get into the second one. The Narcissus Effect. Gazing at an image in the water of the pond, the Greek youth Narcissus fell in love with it. And when he found out that the image was his own reflection and that he therefore could not consummate his love, he despaired and drowned himself. All of us have similar problem. We are profoundly in love with ourselves. But since this love excludes the love object outside ourselves, it remains continuously unsatisfied and unfulfilled. The narcissus effect plays on the universal narcissism. You look deep into the souls of other people, fathom their inmost desires, their values, their tastes, their spirit, and you reflect it back to them, making yourself a kind of mirror image. Your ability to reflect their psyche gives you great power over them. They may even feel a tinge of love. This is simply the ability to mimic another person, not physically, but psychologically, and it is immensely powerful because it plays upon the unsatisfied self love of a child. Normally, people bombarded us with their experiences, their tastes. They hardly ever make the effort to see things through our eyes. This is annoying, but this also creates great opportunity. If you can show you understand another person by reflecting their inmost feelings, they will be entranced and disarmed. All the more so because it happens so rarely, no one can resist this feeling of being harmoniously reflected on the outside world, even though you might well be manufacturing it for their benefit and for deceptive purposes of your own. The narcissus effect works wonders in both social life and business. It gives us both the seducer's and courtier's mirror. Number three, the moral effect. The power of verbal argument is extremely limited and often accomplishes the opposite of what is intended. As Gracian remarks, the truth is generally seen, rarely heard. The moral effect is a perfect way to demonstrate your ideas through action. Quite simply, you teach others a lesson by giving them a taste of their own medicine. In the moral effect, you mirror what other people do have done to you and do so in a way that makes them realize what you are doing to them exactly what they did to you. You make them feel that their behavior has been unpleasant as opposed to hearing you complain and whine about it, which only gets their defenses up. As they feel the result of their actions mirrored back at them, they realize the profoundest sense how they hurt or punish others with their unsocial behavior. You objectify the qualities you want them to feel ashamed of and create a mirror in which they can gaze at their follies and learn a lesson about themselves. This technique is often used by educators, psychologists, and anyone who has to deal with unpleasant and unconscious behavior. This is the teacher's mirror. Whether or not there is actually anything wrong with the way people have treated you, however, it can often be to your advantage to reflect it back to them in a way that makes them feel guilty about it. Last but not least, the hallucinatory effect. Mirrors are tremendously deceptive, for they create a sense that you are looking at the real world. Actually, though, nothing. I'm on live. You want to say hi? No? Okay. It's okay. Mirrors are tremendously deceptive. Thank you. For they create a sense that you are looking at the real world. Actually, though, you are only staring at a piece of glass, which, as everyone knows, cannot show the world exactly as it is. Everything in a mirror is reversed. When Alice goes through the looking glass in Lewis Carroll's book, she enters a world that is back to front and more than just visually. The hallucinatory effect comes from creating a perfect copy of an object, a place, a person. This copy acts as a kind of dummy. People take it for the real thing because it has the physical appearance of the real thing. This is the preeminent techniques of a con artist who strategically mimic the real world to deceive you. It also has applications in any arena that requires camouflage. This is the deceiver's mirror. Okay, guys, so let's go ahead and read the first little red blurb, the first little red story, and let me know what you guys thought so far of what I've read. The Merchant and His Friend. A certain merchant once had a great desire to make a long journey. Now, in regard that was not very wealthy, it is requisite, said he to himself, that before my departure I should leave some part of my estate in the city, so to that to the end that if I meet with ill luck in my travels, I may have wherewithal to keep me at my return. To this purpose, he delivered a great number of bars of iron, which were a principal part of his wealth, and entrusts to one of his friends, desiring him to keep them during his absence, and then, taking his leave, away he went. Some time after, having had but ill luck in his travels, he returned home, and the first thing he did was to go to his friend and demand his iron. But his friend, who owed several sums of money, having sold the iron to pay his own debts, made him this answer. Truly, friend, said he, I put your iron into a room that was close locked, imagining it would have been there as secure as my own gold. But an accident has happened which no one could have suspected, for there was a rat in the room which ate it all up. The merchant, pretending ignorance, replied, It is a terrible misfortune to me indeed, but I know of old the what? Sorry, guys. I know of old that rats love iron extremely. I have suffered by them many times before the same manner, and therefore can the better bear my present affliction. The answer extremely pleased the friend, who was glad to hear that the merchant so well inclined to believe that a rat had eaten his iron, and to remove all suspicions desired him to dine with him the next day. The merchant promised he would, but in the meantime he met in the middle of the city one of his friend's children. The child he carried home and locked up in the room. The next day he went to his friend, who seemed to be in great affliction, which he had asked him the cause of, as if he had been perfectly ignorant of what had happened. Oh, my dear friend, answered the other, I beg you to excuse me if you do not see me so cheerful as otherwise I would be. I have lost one of my children. I have had him cried by the sound of trumpet, but I do not know what is become of him. Oh, replied the merchant, I am grieved to hear this, for yesterday in the evening, as I parted from hence, I saw an owl in the air with the child in his claws, but whether it were yours I cannot tell. Why, you most foolish and absurd creature, replied a friend, are you not ashamed to tell such an egregious lie? An owl that weighs most not above 2 or 3 pounds, can he carry a boy that weighs above 50? Why, replied the merchant, do you make such a wonder at that, as if in the country there where one rat can eat 100 tons of weight of iron, it were such a wonder for an owl to carry a child that weighs not over 50 pounds in all? The friend upon this found that the merchant was no such fool as he took him to be, begged his pardon for the cheat which he designed to have put him upon, restored him the value of his iron, and so had his son again. Fables by Philippe India. I was so confused reading that whole thing, guys. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, guys, so this one, okay. Observances of mirror effects. Observance 1. In February of 1815, the Emperor Napoleon escaped from the island of Elba, where he had been imprisoned by the Allied forces of Europe, and returned to Paris in a march that stirred the French nation. Rallying troops and citizens of all classes to his side, chasing the successor, King Louis the 18th off the throne. By March, however, having reestablished himself in power, he had to face the fact that France's situation had gravely changed. The country was devastated. He had no allies among the other European nations, and his most loyal and important ministers had deserted him or left the country. Only one man remained, the old regime, Joseph Fouché, the former minister of police. Napoleon had relied on Fouché to do his dirty work throughout his previous reign, but he had never been able to figure his minister out. He kept a corps of agents to spy on all of his ministers so that he would always have an edge on them, but no one had gotten anything on Fouché. If suspected of some misdeed, the minister would not get angry or take the accusation personally. He would submit, nod, smile, and change colors chameleon like, adapting to the requirements of the moment. At first, this had seemed somewhat pleasant and charming, but after a while, it frustrated Napoleon, who felt outdone by the slippery man. At one time or another, he had fired all of his most important ministers, including Talleyrand, but he never touched Fouché. And so, in 1815, back in power and in need of help, he felt he had no choice but to reappoint Fouché as his minister of police. Several weeks into his new reign, Napoleon's spies told him that he believed Fouché was in a secret contract with the ministers of the foreign countries, including Metternich of Austria. Afraid that his most valuable minister was betraying him to his enemies, Napoleon had to find out the truth before it was too late. He could not confront Fouché directly in person that the man was slippery as an eel. He needed hard proof. This seemed to come in April when the emperor's private police captured a Viennese gentleman who had come to Paris to pass information on to Fouché. Ordering the man brought before him, Napoleon threatened to shoot him then and there unless he confessed. The man broke down and admitted that he had given Fouché a letter from Metternich written in invisible ink, arranging for a secret meeting of special agents in Basel. Napoleon accordingly ordered one of his own agents to infiltrate this meeting. If Fouché was indeed planning to betray him, he would finally be caught red handed and would hang. Napoleon waited impatiently for the agent's return, but to his bewilderment, the agent showed up days later, reporting that he had heard nothing that would implicate Fouché in a conspiracy. In fact, it seemed that and other he in fact it seemed that the other agents present suspected Fouché of double crossing them as if he were working for Napoleon all along. Napoleon did not believe this for an instant. Fouché had somehow outwitted him again. The following morning, Fouché visited Napoleon and remarked, "By the way, sire, I never told you that I had a letter from Metternich a few days ago. My mind was so full of things in the greater moment. Besides, his emissary omitted to give the powder needed to make such writing legible. Here at length in this letter, sure that Fouché was toying with him, Napoleon exploded. You are a traitor, Fouché. I ought to have you hanged. He continued to harangue Fouché, but could not fire him without proof. Fouché only expressed amazement at the emperor's words, but inwardly he smiled, for all along he had been playing a mirroring game. Interesting. Now let's go ahead and interpret what I just read to you guys. Fouché had known for years that Napoleon kept on top of those around him by spying on them day and night. The minister had survived this game by having his own spies spy on Napoleon's spies, thus neutralizing any accusation Napoleon might take against him. In the case of the meeting in Basel, he even turned the tables, knowing that about Napoleon's double agent. He set it up so that he would appear as if Fouché were a loyal double agent too. Fouché gained power and flourished in a period of great tumult by marrying those around him. During the French Revolution, he was radical Jacobin. In the Terror, he became a moderate Republican. Under Napoleon, he became committed imperialist, who Napoleon ennobled and made the Duke of Otranto. If Napoleon took up the weapon of digging up dirt on people, Fouché made sure he had the dirt on Napoleon as well as on everyone else. This also allowed him to predict the emperor's plans and desires, so that he could echo his boss's sentiments before he had even uttered them. Shielding his actions in the mirror strategy, Fouché could also plot offensive moves without being caught in the act. This is the power of mirroring those around you. First, you give this feeling that you share their thoughts and goals. Second, if they suspect you have ulterior ulterior motives, the mirror shields you from them, preventing them from figuring out your strategy. Eventually, this will infuriate and unsettle them. By playing the double, you steal their thunder, suck away their initiative, make them feel hopeless. You also gain the ability to choose when and how to unsettle them. Another avenue to power, and the mirror saves your mental energy. Simply echoing the moves of others gives you the space to do you need to develop a strategy of your own. Guys, I'm reading this so fast, it's not even funny. Okay, second red story. When you have come to grips and are striving together with the enemy, you realize that you cannot advance, you soak in, and you become one with the enemy. You can win by applying a suitable technique while you are mutually entangled. You can win often decisively with the advantage of knowing how to soak into the enemy, whereas were you to were you to draw apart, you would lose the chance to win. And that's the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Masushi, Japan, 7th century. Let's read the third little red story. The Fox and the Stork. One day, Mr. Fox decided to fork out and invite old Mrs. Stork out. The dinner wasn't elaborate, being habitually mean. He didn't go in for a hot cuisine. In fact, it consisted of a shallow plate of thin gruel. Within a minute, our joker had lapped his plate clean. Meanwhile, his guest, fishing away with her beak, got not a morsel in it. To pay him back for this cruel practical joke, the stork invited the fox to dinner the following week. I should be delighted, he replied. When it comes to friends, I've never stand upon pride. Punctually, on the day he ran to his hostess' house and at once began praising everything. What taste, what chic, and the food done just to a turn. Then he sat down with a hearty appetite, foxes are always ready to eat, and savored the delicious smell of meat. It was mince meat and served to serve him right. In a long-necked, narrow-mouthed ern, the stork, easily swooping, enjoyed her fill with her long bill. His snout, though, being the wrong shape and size, he had no return to his den, empty-bellied, tail dragging, ears drooping, as red in the face as a fox who had been caught by a hen. And that's the Selected Fables by Jean de La Fonte. Now, let's get to the fourth one, guys. The Purloined Letter. When I wish to find out how wise or how stupid or how good or how wicked is anyone or what are his thoughts at the moment, I fashion my expression to my face as accurately as possible, in accordance with the expression of his, and then wait to see what thoughts or sentiments arise in my mind or heart as if to match the correspond with the expression. Edgar Allan Poe, 1809 to 1849. My God. Okay, guys. Observance number 2. Early on in his career, the ambitious statesman and general Alcibiades of Athens, 450 to 404 BC, fashioned a formidable weapon that became the source of his power. In every encounter with others, he would sense their moods and tastes and carefully tailor his words and actions to mirror their inmost desires. He would seduce them with the idea that their values were superior to everyone else's and that his goals was to model himself on them or help them realize their dreams. Few could resist his charm. The first man to fall under his spell was the philosopher Socrates. Alcibiades, I don't know if I'm saying it even close to right, represented the opposite of what Socratic ideal of simplicity and of righteousness. He lived lavishly and was completely unprincipled. Whenever he met Socrates, however, he mirrored the old man's sobriety, eating simply, accompanying Socrates on long walks, and talking only of philosophy and virtue. Socrates was not completely fooled. He was not unaware of Alcibiades' other life, but only made him vulnerable to a logic that flattered him. Only in my presence, he felt, does this man submit to a virtuous influence. Only I have such power over him. This feeling intoxicated Socrates, who became Alcibiades' fervent admirer and supporter. one day even risking his own life to rescue a young man in battle. The Athenians considered Alcibiades their greatest orator, for he had an uncanny ability to tune into his audience aspirations and mirror their desires. He made his greatest speeches in support of the invasion of Sicily, which he thought would bring great wealth to Athens, limitless glory to himself. The speeches gave expression to young Athenians' thirst to conquer land for themselves rather than living off the victories of their ancestors. But he also tailored his words to reflect older men's nostalgia for the glory years when Athens led Greeks against Persia, then went on to create an empire. All Athens now dreamed of conquering Sicily. Alcibiades' plan was approved, and he was made an expedition commander. While Alcibiades was leading the invasion of Sicily, however, certain Athenians fabricated charges against him of profaning sacred statues. He knew his enemies would have him executed if he returned home, so at the last minute he deserted the Athenian fleet and defected to Athens' bitter enemy, Sparta. The Spartans welcomed this great man to their side, but they knew his reputation and were wary of him. Alcibiades loved luxury. The Spartans were warrior people who worshipped austerity, and they were afraid he would corrupt their youth. But, much to their relief, Alcibiades, who arrived in Sparta, was not at all what they expected. He wore his hair untrimmed as they did, took cold baths, ate coarse bread and black broth, and wore simple clothes. To the Spartans, this signified that he had come to see their way of life as superior to the Athenian, greater than they were. He had chosen to be a Spartan rather than being a born one, and should thus be honored above all others. They fell under his spell and reigned in his charm. He managed to seduce the king of Sparta's wife and make her pregnant. And when this became public, he once more had to flee for his life. This time, Alcibiades defected to Persia, where he suddenly went from Spartan simplicity to embracing a lavish Persian lifestyle down to the last detail. It was, of course, immensely flattering to the Persians to see a Greek of Alcibiades' stature prefer their culture over his own, and they showered him with honors, land, and power. Once seduced by the mirror, they failed to notice that behind this shield, Alcibiades was playing a double game, secretly helping Athenians in their war with Sparta, and thus re-ingratiating himself with the city, which he desperately wanted to return, and which welcomed him back with open arms in 408 BC. Interpretation. In his early political career, Alcibiades made a discovery that changed his whole approach to power. He had a colorful and forceful personality, but when he argued his ideas strongly with other people, he would win over a few while at the same time alienating many more. The secret to gaining ascendancy over large numbers, he came to believe, was not to impose his colors, but to absorb the colors of those around him, like a chameleon. Once people fell for the trick, the deceptions he went on to practice would be invisible to them. Understand, everyone is wrapped up in their own narcissistic shell. When you try to impose your own ego on them, a wall goes up, resistance is increased. By marrying them, however, you seduce them into a kind of narcissistic rapture. They are gazing at the double of their own soul. This double is actually manufactured in its entirety by you. Once you have used this mirror to seduce them, you have great power over them. And it is worth noting, however, the dangers of the promiscuous use of the mirror. In Alcibiades' presence, people felt larger and their egos had been doubled. But once he left, they felt empty and diminished. And when they saw him marrying completely different people as he had married them, they felt not just diminished but betrayed. Alcibiades' overuse to the mirror effect whose people sorry made whole people feel used, so that he constantly had to flee from one place to another. Indeed, Alcibiades so angered the Spartans that they had finally had him murdered. He had gone too far. The seducer's mirror must be used with caution and discrimination. Okay, guys, let's read this little red blurb. I have literally less than 30 minutes to finish this, and I have 10 pages. Oh my god. Lorenzo de' Medici seduces the Pope. Lorenzo de' Medici lost no opportunity of increasing the respect which Pope Innocent now felt for him and of gaining his friendship. It is possible his affection, he took the trouble to discover the Pope's taste and indulged them accordingly. He sent them casks of their favorite wine. He sent them courteous, flattering letters in which he assured him when the Pope was ill that he felt his sufferings as though they were his own, in which he encouraged them with such fortifying statements as a pope is what he wills to be, and in which, as though incidentally, he included his views on the proper course of papal policies. Innocent was gratified by Lorenzo's attentions and convinced by his arguments so completely indeed, and he come to share his opinions that as the disgruntled Farisi's ambassador put it, the Pope sleeps with the eyes of the magnificent Lorenzo. The House of Medici, Its Rise and Fall by Christopher Hibbert, 1980. Okay, guys, there's two more little red blurbs to read. Wittgenstein had an extraordinary gift for divining the thoughts of the person with whom he engaged in discussion. While the other struggled to put his thoughts into word, Wittgenstein would perceive what it was the state it for him and state it for him. Oh my god. I was struggling so bad right there. This power of his, which sometimes seems uncanny, was made impossible, I am sure, by his own prolonged and continuous researches. By Ludwig Wittgenstein, a memoir. Norman Malcolm. The doctor should be opaque to his patients, and like a mirror should show them nothing but what is shown to him. By Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939. Okay, guys, let's get into observance number 3. In 1652, a recently widowed Baroness Mancini moved her family from Rome to Paris, where she could count on the influence and protection of her brother, Cardinal Mazarin, the French prime minister. Of the Baroness' 5 daughters, 4 dazzled the court with their beauty and high spirits. These infamously charming nieces of Cardinal Mazarin became known as the Marzanettes and soon found themselves invited to all of the most important court functions. One daughter, Marie Mancini, did not share this good fortune, for she lacked the beauty and grace of her sisters, who, along with their mother and even Cardinal Mazarin, eventually came to dislike her, for they felt she spoiled the family image. They tried to persuade her to enter a convent where she would be less of an embarrassment, but she refused. Instead, she applied herself to her studies, learning Latin and Greek, perfecting her French, and practicing her musical skills. On the rare occasions when the family would let her attend court affairs, she trained herself to be an artful listener, sizing people up for their weaknesses and hidden desires, and when she finally met the future King Louis XIV in 1657, Louis was 17 years old, Marie 18. She decided that to spite her family and uncle, she would find a way to make this young man fall in love with her. This was a seemingly impossible task for such a plain-looking girl, but Marie studied the future king closely. She noticed that her sister's frivolity did not please him, and she sensed that he loathed the scheming and petty politicking that went on all around him. She saw that he had a romantic nature. He read adventure novels, insisted on marching at the head of his armies, and had high ideals for and passion for glory. The court did not feed these fantasies of his. It was banal, superficial world that bored him. The key to Louis's heart, Marie saw, would be the construct a mirror of his reflecting the fantasies of his youthful yearnings for glory and romance. To begin with, she immersed herself in the romantic novels, poems, and plays that she knew the young king read voraciously. When Louis began to engage her in conversation, to his delight, she would talk of things that stirred his soul, not the fathom not this fashion or piece of gossip, but rather courtly love and deeds of great knights, the nobility of past kings and heroes. She fed his thirst for glory by creating an image of an August, the superior king whom she could aspire to become. She stirred his imagination. As the future Sun King spent more and more of his time in Marie's presence, it eventually became clear that he had fallen in love with the least likely young woman of the court. To the horror of his sisters and mother, he showered Marie Mancini with attention. He brought her along in all of his military campaigns and made a show of stationing her where she could watch as he marched into battle. He even promised Marie that he would marry her and make her queen. Marzan, however, would never allow a king to marry his niece, a woman who could bring France no diplomatic or royal alliances. Louis had to marry a princess of Spain or Austria. In 1658, Louis succumbed to the pressure and agreed to break off the first romantic involvement of his life. He did so with much regret, and at the end of his life, he acknowledged that he never loved anyone as much as Marie Mancini. Aww. So let's go ahead and interpret that, guys. Marie Mancini played the seducer's game to perfection. First, she took a step back and to study her prey. Seduction often fails to get past the first step because it is too aggressive. The first move must always be a retreat. By studying the king from a distance, Marie saw what distinguished him from others: his high ideals, romantic nature, and snobbish disdain for petty politics. Marie's next step was to make a mirror for these hidden yearnings on Louis's part, letting him glimpse what he himself could be, a godlike king. This mirror had several functions: satisfying Louis's ego by giving him a double to look at. It also focused on him so exclusively as to give him the feeling that Marie existed for him alone. Surrounded by a pack of scheming courtiers who only had their own self interest at heart, he could not fail to be touched by the devotional focus. Finally, Marie's mirror set up an ideal for him to live up to: the noble knight of the medieval court. To a soul both romantic and ambitious, nothing could be more intoxicating than to have someone hold up an idealized reflection of him. In effect, it was Marie Mancini who created the image of the Sun King. Indeed, Louis later admitted the enormous part she had played in fashioning his radiant self image. This is the power of the seducer's mirror. By doubling the tastes and ideals of the target, it shows your attention to his or her psychology, and attention to more charming than any aggressive pursuit. Find out what sets the other apart and then hold up a mirror that will reflect and bring it out of them. Feed their fantasies of power and greatness by reflecting their ideals, and they will succumb. Okay, guys, observance number 4. In 1538, with the death of his mother, Helena, the 8-year-old future Tsar Ivan IV, or Ivan the Terrible of Russia, became an orphan. For the next 5 years, he watched as his princely caste, the boyars, terrorized the country. Now and then, to mock the young Ivan, they would make him wear a crown and scepter and place him on the throne. When the little boy's feet dangled over the edge of the chair, they would laugh and lift him up off of it, handing him from a man to the man, making him feel like helplessness compared to them. When Ivan was 13, he boldly murdered the boyar leader and ascended to the throne. For the next few decades, he struggled to subdue the boyars' power, but they continued to defy him. By 1575, his efforts to transform Russia and defeat his enemies had exhausted him. Meanwhile, his subjects were complaining bitterly about his endless wars, his secret police, the unvanquished and oppressive boyars. His own ministers became to question his moves. Finally, he had enough. He had had enough, and in 1564 he had temporarily abandoned the throne, forcing his subjects to call him back to power. Now he took the strategy a step further and abdicated. To take his place, Ivan elevated a general of his, Simeon Bekbulatovich, to the throne. But although Simeon had recently converted to Christianity, he was by birth a Tartar. His enthronement was an insult to Ivan's subjects, since Russians looked down on the Tartars as inferiors and infidels. Yet Ivan ordered all of the Russians, including the boyars, pledge obedience to their new ruler. And while Simeon moved into the Kremlin, Ivan lived in a humble house on Moscow's outskirts, from which he would sometimes visit the palace, bow down, bow before the throne, sit among other boyars, and humbly petition Simeon for favors. Over time, it became clear that Simeon was a kind of king's double. He dressed like Ivan and acted like Ivan, but he had no real power since no one would really obey him. The boyars at the court, who were old enough to remember taunting Ivan when he was a boy by placing him on the throne, saw the connection. They made Ivan feel weak pretender, so now he mirrored them by placing a weaker pretender of his own on the throne. For 2 long years, Ivan held the mirror of Simeon up to the Russian people. The mirror said, "Your whining and disobedience have made me a czar with no real power. So I will reflect back to you with a czar with no real power, and you have treated me disrespectfully, so I will do the same to you, making Russia the laughing stock of the world." In 1577, in the name of the Russian people, the chastised boyars once again begged Ivan to return to the throne, which he did. He lived as a czar until his death. In 1584, and the conspiracies, complaining, and second guessing disappeared along with Simeon. Interpretation. In 1564, after threatening to abdicate, Ivan had been granted absolute powers, but the powers had been slowly chipped away as every sector of the society, the boyars, the church, the government, vied for more control. Foreign wars had exhausted the country, internal bickering had increased, and Ivan's attempt to respond had been met with scorn. Russia had turned into the kind of boisterous classroom in which the pupils laughed openly at the teacher. If he raised his voice or complained, he would only met with more resistance. He had to teach them a lesson, give them a taste of their own medicine. Simeon Bekbuladovich was a mirror he used to do so. After 2 years in which the throne had been an object of ridicule and disgust, the Russians people learned their lesson. They wanted their czar back, conceding to him all the dignity and respect that the position should always have commanded. For the rest of his reign, Russia and Ivan got along fine. Understand, people are locked in their own experiences. When you whine about some insensitivity on their part, they may seem to understand, but inwardly they are untouched and even more resistant. The goal of power is always to lower people's resistance to you. For this, you need tricks, and one trick to is to teach them a lesson. Instead of haranguing people verbally, then create a kind of mirror on their behavior. In doing so, you leave them two choices. They can ignore you or they can start to think about themselves. And even if they ignore you, you will have planted a seed in their unconscious that will eventually add a touch of caricature and exaggeration, as Ivan did by enthroning a Tartar. It is the little spice in the soup that will open up their eyes and make them see the ridiculousness in their own actions. Okay, guys, 41 minutes in. We only have like 6 more pages. Observance 5. Dr. Milton H. Erickson, a pioneer in strategic psychotherapy, would often educate his patients powerfully but indirectly by creating a kind of mirror effect. Constructing an analogy to make patients see the truth on their own, he would bypass their resistance to change. When Dr. Erickson treated married couples complaining of sexual problems, for instance, he often found that psychotherapy's tradition of direct confrontation and problem airing only heightened the spouse's resistance and sharpened their differences. Instead, he would draw a husband and wife out on other topics, often banal ones, trying to find analogy for sexual conflict. In one couple's first sessions, the pair was discussing their eating habits, especially at dinner. The wife preferred the leisurely approach, a drink before the meal, some appetizers, and then a small main course, all at a slow, civil pace. This frustrated the husband. He wanted to get a dinner over quickly and dig right into the main course. The bigger the better. As the conversation continued, the couple began to catch glimpses of analogy to the problems in bed. The moment they made this connection, however, Dr. Erickson would change the subject, carefully avoiding a discussion of the real problem. The couple thought Erickson was just getting to know them and would deal with the problem directly the next time he saw them. But at the end of the first session, Dr. Erickson directed them to arrange a dinner a few nights away that would combine each person's desires. The wife would get a slow meal, including spent time bonding, and the husband would get the big dishes he wanted to eat. Without realizing they were acting under the doctor's gentle guidance, the couple would walk into a mirror of their problem, and in the mirror, they would solve their problems for themselves, ending the evening just as the doctor had hoped by mirroring the improved dinner dynamics in bed. In dealing with more severe problems, such as the schizophrenic mirror fantasy world of his or her own construction, Dr. Erickson would always try to enter the mirror and work within it. He once treated a hospital inmate who believed he was Jesus Christ, draping sheets around his body, talking in vague parables, and bombarding staff and patients with endless Christian proselytizing. No therapy or drugs seemed to work. until one day Dr. Erickson went up to the young man and said, I understand that you have had experience as a carpenter. Being Christ, the patient had to say that he had had such an experience, and Erickson immediately put him to work building bookcases and other useful items, allowing him to wear his Jesus garb. Over the next few weeks, the patient worked on these projects. His mind became less occupied with Jesus' fantasies and more focused on his labor. As the carpentry work took precedence, a psychic shift took effect. The religious fantasies remained, but faded comfortably in the background, allowing the man to function in society. Interpretation. Communication depends on the metaphors and symbols, which are the basis of language itself. A metaphor is a kind of mirror to the concrete and real, which is often expresses more clearly and deeply than a literal description does. When you are dealing with the intractable willpower of other people, direct communication often only heightens their resistance. This happens most clearly when you complain about people's behavior, particularly in sensitive areas such as their love making. You will effect a far more lasting change if, like Dr. Erickson, you construct an analogy, a symbolic mirror of the situation, and guide the other through it. As Christ himself understood, talking in parables is often the best way to teach a lesson, for it allows people to realize the truth in their own. When dealing with people who are lost in reflections of fantasy worlds, including the host of people who do not live in mental hospitals, never try to push them into reality by shattering their mirrors. Instead, enter their world and operate inside of it, under under their rules, gently guiding them out of the hall of mirrors which they have entered. Okay, guys. Observance number 6. The great 16th century Japanese tea maker Takino Shu once passed a house and noticed a young man watering flowers near his front gate. Two things caught Shu's attention. First, the graceful way the man performed his task, and second, the stunningly beautiful rose on Sharon blossoms that blossomed in the garden. He stopped and introduced himself to the man, whose name was Sen no Rikyu. Shu wanted to stay, but he had a prior engagement and had to hurry off. Before he left, however, Rikyu invited him to take tea with him the following morning. Shu happily accepted. When Shu opened the garden gate the next day, he was horrified to see not a single flower remain. More than anything else, he had come to see the rows of Sharon blossoms that he had not had the time to appreciate the day before. Now disappointed, he started to leave. But at the gate, he stopped himself and decided to enter Sen no Rikyu's tea room. Immediately inside, he stopped in his tracks and gazed in astonishment. Before him, a vase hung from the ceiling, and in the vase stood a single rose of Sharon's blossom, the most beautiful in the garden. Somehow Sen no Rikyu had read the guest's thoughts, and with this one eloquent gesture, had demonstrated that the day guest and the host would be in perfect harmony. Sen no Rikyu went on and become the most famous tea master of all, and his trademark was his uncanny ability to harmonize himself with the guest's thoughts and think one step ahead, enchanting them by adapting to their tastes. One day, Rikyu was invited to tea by Yamashina Hachewing, an admirer of the tea ceremony, but also a man with vivid sense of humor. When Rikyu arrived at Hechewing's home, he found the garden gate shut. So when he opened it and looked for the host on the other side of the gate, he saw that someone had first dug a ditch, then carefully covered it with a canvas and earth. Realizing that Hitchewing had planned a practical joke, he obligingly walked right into the ditch, muddying his clothes in the process. Apparently horrified, Hetchewing came running out and hurried Rikyu to the bath and for some inexplicable reason stood up already prepared. After bathing, Rikyu joined Hetchewing in the tea ceremony, which both enjoyed immensely, sharing a laugh about the incidents. Later, Sen no Rikyu explained to a friend that he had heard about Hetchewing's practical joke beforehand. But since it should always be one's aim to conform to the wishes of one's host, I fell into a hole knowingly and thus assured the success of the meeting. Tea is by no means mere obsequiousness, but there is no tea where the host and guests are not in harmony with one another. Etchewing's vision of the dignified Senyu Rikyu at the bottom of the ditch had pleased him endlessly, but Rikyu had gained a pleasure of his own by complying with the host's wishes and watching him amuse himself in this way. Interpretation. Senyu Rikyu, oh my god, guys, my phone is at 9%. I gotta hurry up. I got to hurry up. Senno Riki was no magician or seer. He watched those around him acutely, plumbing the subtle gestures that revealed a hidden desire, then producing the desire's image. Although Shu never spoke of being enchanted by the rose of Sharon's blossoms, Riku read it in his eyes. If mirroring a person's desires meant falling into a ditch, so be it. Riku's power resided in his skillful use of the courtier's mirror, which gave him the appearance of an unusual ability to see into other people. Learn to manipulate the courtier's mirror, for it will bring you great power. Study people's eyes, follow their gestures, surer barometers of pain and pleasure than any spoken word. Notice and remember the details, the clothing, the choice of friends, the daily habits, the tossed out remarks that reveal hidden and rarely indulged desires. Soak it all in, find out what happened, what lies what lies under the surface, and then make yourself a mirror to their unspoken selves. That is the key to this power. The other person has not asked for their consideration and has not mentioned this pleasure in the rose of Sharon. And when you reflect it back to him, when his pleasure is heightened because it is unasked for, remember the wordless communication, the indirect compliment contains the most power. No one can resist the enchantment of the courtier's mirror. Guys, I am so thirsty. I've been reading for 50 minutes straight. Okay, now observance number 7. Holy cow. Yellow Kid Wheel, the con artist extraordinaire, used Deceiver's mirror in his most brilliant cons. Most audacious of all was his recreation of a bank in Moonsea, Indiana. When Will read one day that the merchant's bank in Moonsea had moved, he saw an opportunity he could not pass up. Will rented out the original merchant's building, which still contained a bank furniture, complete with the teller windows. He bought money bags, stenciled a bank's invented name on them, and filled them with steel washers and arrayed them impressively behind the teller windows. Along the bundles of boodle, real bills hiding newspaper cut to size for his bank staff and customers. Wield hired gamblers, bookies, girls from local bawdy houses, and other assorted confederates. He even had a local thug pose on the bank dick. Claiming to be the broker for a certificate investment the bank was offering, Will would fish the waters and hook the proper wealthy sucker. He would bring this man to the bank and ask to see the president. An officer of the bank would tell them that they had to wait, which only heightened the realism of the con. One always has to wait to see the bank president. As they waited, the bank would bustle like with bank-like activity. As call girls and bookies in disguise floated in and out, making deposits and withdrawals and tipping their hats to the phony bank dick. Lulled by this perfect copy of reality, the sucker would deposit 50,000 into a fake bank without a worry in the world. Over the years, Will did the same thing with the deserted yacht club, an abandoned brokerage office, a relocated real estate office, and completely realistic gambling club. Interpretation. The mirroring of reality offers immense deceptive powers. The right uniform, the perfect accent, the proper props.
So she just left. Guess who left right behind? Big Max.
Only a matter of time. I know.
He's like, I'm gonna get myself a cougar in
I know. He said.
He'll never forget Miami.
I know, right? Well, he said he wants to hang out with someone.
He has a girlfriend.
What?
Last night I found out. But they're in bad terms, so like they're taking a break. I don't know if he did this out of spite.
He's only been here for a week, apparently.
And every time he talks to her, he talks to her, he goes outside the dealership and talks to her outside.
Oh, yeah. He was like, "I'm lonely. You have any friends that you can hit me out with?"
Here, no. But in California, he got plenty.
That's crazy. It's only a matter of time. Yeah. Of course. Okay. The mirroring of reality offers immense deceptive powers. The right uniform, the perfect accent, the proper props, the deception cannot be deciphered because it is enmeshed in the simulation of reality. People have intense desire and need to believe, and their first instinct is to trust a well-constructed facade, to mistake it for reality. After all, we cannot go around doubting the reality of everything we see. That would be too exhausting. We habitually accept appearances, and this is the credulity you can use. In this particular game, it is the first moment that counts the most. If your sucker's suspicions are not raised by their first glance at the mirror's reflection, they will stay suppressed. They enter the hall of mirrors, they will be unable to distinguish the real from the fake, and it will become easier and easier to deceive them. Remember, study the world's surfaces and learn to mirror them in your habits, your manner, your clothes. Like a carnivorous plant to unsuspecting insects, you will look like all the other plants in the field. Authority. The task of a military operation is to accord deceptively with the intentions of the enemy. Get what they want first, subtly anticipate them. Maintain discipline and adapt to the enemy. Thus, at first, you are like a maiden, so the enemy opens his door. Then you are like a rabbit on the loose, so the enemy cannot keep you out. Sun Tzu, 4th century. Now, close your eyes and imagine this unless you're driving or handling heavy machinery, guys. We're almost at the end. The shield of Perseus. It is polished into a reflecting mirror. Medusa cannot see you, only her own hideousness reflected back at her. Behind such a mirror, you can deceive, mock, and infuriate. With one blow, you can sever Medusa's unsuspecting head. Guys, this is a warning right now. A warning. Beware of mirrored situations. Mirrors contain great power, but also dangerous reefs. Mirrors contain great power but also dangerous reefs, including the mirrored situation, a situation that seems to reflect a closely resemble a previous one, mostly in style and surface appearance. You can often back into such a situation without fully understanding it. While those around you understand it quite well and compare it to you, to whatever happened before, most often you suffer by the comparison, seeming either weaker than the previous occupant of your position or else tainted by any unpleasant associations that a person has left behind. In 1864, the composer Richard Wagner moved to Munich at the behest of Ludwig II, known variously as the Swan King or the Mad King of Bavaria. Ludwig was Wagner's biggest fan and most generous patron. The strength of his support turned Wagner's head, and once established in Munich under the king's protection, he would be able to say and do whatever he wanted. Wagner's moved into a lavish house, which the king eventually bought for him. This house was but a stone throw from the former home of Lola Montez, the notorious courtesan who had plunged Ludwig II's grandfather into a crisis that had forced him to advocate. Warned that he could be infected by this association, Wagner only scoffed. I am no Lola Montez, he said. Soon enough, however, the citizens of Munich began to resent the favors and money showered on Wagner and dubbed him the second Lola or Loletta. He unconsciously began to tread in Lola's footsteps, spending money extravagantly, meddling in matters beyond music, even dabbling in politics, and advising the king on cabinet appointments. Meanwhile, Ludwig's affection for Wagner seemed intense and undignified for a king, just like his grandfather's love for Lola Montez. Eventually, Ludwig's minister wrote him a letter. Your Majesty now stands at a fateful parting of ways. You have to choose between the love and respect of your faithful people and the friendship of Richard Wagner. In December of 1865, Ludwig politely asked his friend to leave and never return. Wagner had inadvertently placed himself in Lola Montez's reflection. Once there, everything he did reminded the stolid Bavarians of the dread of that woman, and there was nothing he could do about it. Avoid such association effects like the plague. In a marriage situation, you have little or no control over the reflections and recollections that will be connected to you, and any situation beyond your control is dangerous. Even if the person or event has positive associations, you will suffer from not being able to live up to them. Since the past generally appears greater than the present, if you ever notice people associating you with some past or event or person, do everything you can to separate yourself from that memory and to shatter that reflection. Guys, I finished with 2 minutes to spare before it's time to go home from work. Thank you so much for tuning in to me, listening to Hot Girl Reads 48 Laws of Power. We are almost done with this book, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.